And now the big question becomes for the Spurs team is, who's going to end up getting waived by Monday? And the reason why I say Monday is because Monday is the day for all NBA teams before the regular season starts to trim down their training camp and preseason rosters down to 15 players and 2 players on two-way contracts. So let's talk about the Spurs in particular. They have 14 players on guaranteed contracts, and of those 14 players, 2 of those players are Joe Wieskamp and Romeo Langford, who are both toward the back of the rotation, like we mentioned earlier, Joe. They have 2 players on two-way deals. They have 2 players on non-guaranteed contracts in Trey Jones and Keita Bates-Diop. And then they have 1 player on a training camp deal in Alize Johnson. So we assume that they're going to most likely waive Alize Johnson just because, again, he's on a non-guaranteed training camp deal. Trey Jones is most likely safe because he is the team's starting point guard. Why would they waive him? His contract status is he has a partially guaranteed $500,000 deal. His contract will guarantee a day before the season begins. So it's probably on Tuesday for $1.7 million, according to Spotrac. Keita Bates-Diop is probably also safe in his roster status because his contract guarantees on opening night. And like we've said before, he's been in all 5 preseason games. He's been part of the rotation. Now, the 2 players that are most likely to get waived, one of the 2 players, should I say, is either Joe Wieskamp, who has a $2.1 million deal guaranteed, and then a $2.2 million non-guaranteed for next season. So it's really just a 1-year deal for $2.1 million. And then Romeo Langford, who has $5.6 million guaranteed this season, and he can become a restricted free agent in this coming summer. So entering the preseason, Joe, I really thought that it was going to be Langford most likely. But then, we saw him play in all 5 preseason games in terms of the third and fourth quarters. And then in that final game against OKC, he ended up getting first quarter minutes. Wieskamp, we haven't seen really at all in this preseason. He's gotten a few minutes here and there. And even in that final game against OKC, he didn't play at all. And so I thought, they signed Joe this past summer to a 2-year deal, and I thought maybe they have plans for him for the future, but I'm really not sure now after these 5 preseason games who ends up being that player who stays on the team, whether it's Wieskamp or Langford. Are your thoughts still the same, that you think that it's Wieskamp?
Without question, I think, with like you said, seeing Romeo Langford garner most of those minutes that should have gone to Joe Wieskamp, and seeing Joe Wieskamp just sitting there on the bench, just basically with the blank stare, kind of tells you all you need to know at this point. It's going to be to nobody's surprise that if Joe Wieskamp, doesn't make the cut on, by Monday, he gets waived, and you're going to see most likely that come across social media here, probably, I would think by the weekend, probably no later than Sunday. I would think that the Spurs would say, hey, we went ahead and waived the last person. And now we've really trimmed the roster down to where it needs to be. But yeah, I fully expect them to waive Joe Wieskamp. Unfortunately, I mean, they did go ahead and spend $2.1 million to extend him, but in terms of NBA contracts, that's really nothing. So the Spurs have signed players for more than that and waived them.
Yes.
And Damari Carroll, let's put it like that. Yeah. So this is really not going to be that bad against the cap, as you well know. I mean, if anybody wants to know the numbers when it comes to cap space, Paul's your guy.
Yeah, no, a lot of cap space, almost 30 million still there. So, these players, it's not going to be a big hit on their cap space because they have so much that they need to, or that they can spend. And so I'm going to go ahead, in this first cast episode, I'm going to go ahead and stick with Romeo just because I feel like they were still giving him that tryout period of seeing what can he do, especially in that final game against OKC, putting him in the first quarter, more competitive minutes and seeing what he can do. Because again, they didn't really draft him. I know he was a high pick for the Celtics, and he is going to be a free agent this offseason. Whereas Joe, I still saw that, they had the front office, at least, maybe not Coach Paul, but the front office wanted to see something from him, and the fact that they re-signed him this past offseason and gave him a 2-year deal. So I won't be shocked if it ends up being Wieskamp. For now, I'm going to stick with Langford just because of going into the situation with all those guards and everything in front of him, and how, again, the Celtics were the ones who drafted him. Joe, you made a great point there. I do think that this move will come quickly because the Spurs are a team who they want, if they know they're not going to have a player on their team long term, they're going to waive that player. That way they give him an opportunity to sign somewhere else, maybe like on a 2-way deal somewhere, maybe on a end up in the G League somewhere. So again, I think that the Spurs will help out whichever player this is by waiving those players quickly. That way they have a chance before the deadline on Monday to sign somewhere else if there's an opportunity for them. So again, we'll see who it ends up being. Joe has Joe Wieskamp being the player who gets waived, and I have Romeo Langford. We'll see who it ends up being, and then most likely Alize Johnson as well. All right. So so that's that question of who ends up getting waived there on Monday.